max is. And the rest of the code is pretty much the same. Now let me address the issue of the name of this variable. All right, why did I use I? Well, a for loop is a counting loop, and a lot of times you use this loop control variable simply as an index. And this quite often mimics a summing process, as we do in mathematics, and we're used to using single letter variable names for indices, and it's simply acceptable in programming to do so. So when declaring a variable in a for loop, for a for loop, then it's quite all right to use single letter variables. That's acceptable. Okay, let's look at a much more difficult goal, and that is to output a pattern of stars like this. Now you might be thinking, well, that's fairly simple, but it is not quite as simple as you might think. So what's the strategy that we're going to take? Well, when I look at this, I think to myself, I want to output multiple lines, and just for the sake of making this simple to talk about, let's restrict our design to a pattern of 5 stars and 5 lines. So for the first line of 5, I want 5 stars, and then second line 4, 3, 2, 1. So my pattern's 5 by 5, but diminishing number of stars per line in this pattern. So my first thought is, how do I output 5 lines? With a for statement, I'm going to run my index from 1 to 5, and I want to introduce at this point something that you haven't seen. I can create the variable, my index I can create it, I can declare it inside the for loop. It does not have to be a variable that has been declared outside of this loop. I can create it for the loop. This introduces the notion of scope, the scope of a variable. And I want to talk about this more towards the end of this lesson. But very briefly, the scope of this variable I is only inside this for loop. That variable does not exist outside of the loop. But let's go on. Okay, so this is quite clearly going to output 5 lines. 5 blank lines, but it will be 5 lines. I runs from 1 up to 5, incremented by 1. Also, as a side note, you notice that I have the curly braces. In this case, I don't have to have them. This is a single, simple C++ statement. Those curly braces are not necessary. I put them in to make it clear that you can if you want, but they're not necessary. Still, you should indent if you don't have those curly braces. Okay, how do I output 5 stars? Likewise, I'm going to create a counter that runs from 1 to 5, incremented by 1, and then a cout statement that's going to output just a star and a space. Okay, now, if I put them together, combining them, I have what I call an outer loop. That's the first loop. And an inner loop. That's the second loop. Now what this means is that for each iteration of the outer loop, the inner loop is going to be iterated upon a full number of times. Okay? Well, I've set up a tableau here so we can take a look at the output and the state variables of the loop. So let's do exactly that. When we begin, I is 1, right? It starts at 1. In fact, we declare the variable as an int, and we initialize it as 1. That's the very first thing that's executed. And we're going to run through this loop, this outer loop, 5 times. Now, for each time, I'm going to do the inner loop, and then I'm going to output a end line, which is going to bring my cursor back to the beginning of the next line. So I starts at 1. What's j? Well, dropping down to that inner loop, we notice that we're going to declare our counter j and initialize it to 1. So j is 1. Okay, it's going to run up to 5. Right, let's take a look. And for each iteration, it's going to output a star. So, output a star. What happens next? We increment. We check. Right, so I goes from 1 to 2. Is 2 less than 5? Yes. So we're going to output another star. Then we increment, once again, we're going to increment j. Check it. Is it less than 5? Yes. Output a star. Increment 4 now. 4 is still less than 5. We check. Output a star. Increment j is 5. Is 5 less than or equal to 5? Yes. So we output a star. That is to say, we execute our body of the loop. Increment j is now 6. Okay, we check that. Is 6 less than 5? No. Less than or equal to 5? No, it's not. Therefore, control passes out of the loop and down to our outputting of a blank line, that is outputting of the end line, which is going to bring our cursor back to the beginning of the next line, so it'll be here. Okay. Then what? We're done with the first pass of the outer loop. Okay, which means I'm going to jump back up, control jumps back up to our controlling statement, and we're going to increment. I is now 2. Okay, is 2 less than or equal to 5? Yes. So I'm going to execute everything inside that outer loop once again. So j starts at 1. That is less than 5. I output a star. We increment j to 2. Check, is that less than 5? Yes. Output a star. Increment to 3, is it less than 5? Yes. Output a star. Increment to 4, is that less than 5? Yes. Output a star. Increment to 5, is that less than or equal to 5? Yes. We output a star. And what? Whoops. We didn't want that, did we? The pattern we're looking for doesn't have that. So we've made a mistake. What is the mistake? Well, observe. We have I running from 1 to 5. We also have j running 1 to 5. That means for every row we're going to have 5 stars. Well, clearly that's not what we want. We want that the number of stars output per line depends on which line it is. What's the line number? So this expression or this expression, depending on how you write it, must be some function of I, the outer loop control variable. Okay, so what we ended up with then, well, is what we have here on the right. That's the actual result of our code. What we wanted was what's on the left. Okay, let's try again. I think we've got it fixed now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through this and see how it all progresses. Okay, I starts at 1. What's j? Well, we have to jump control down in here. Actually, of course, we back up. I is 1. That gets initialized, and we check to see is I less than or equal to 5. Yes, it is. Therefore, we pass control back into the inner loop. Okay, j gets initialized to 1. We check, is that less than or equal to 5? Minus I plus 1. Now notice that I have j as a function of I. I is in there someplace. What was I? I was 1. So we have 5 minus 1 plus 1 is 5. Is 1 less than or equal to 5? Yes. And notice, if you think about this, as I increases, every time I go through the outer loop, I increases. If I increases, what happens to this controlling expression for j? It's going to decrease, meaning what? The number of times we go through that diminishes. So for each successive line number, that is the row number, the number of stars output is going to decrease. So it makes sense. Okay, so I is 1, j is 1, we output a star. J gets increased to 2, we output a star. Increase to 3, output a star. Increase to 4, output a star. Increase to 5, output a star. Increase to 6, well, let's